Oh, what an empty world it would be without music. All right, I'm going to do something that I've been pondering doing for a very long time, and I kind of allow myself to get a little bit more self-indulgent, more than I already do, at the sort of the tail end of the year, so I'm going to throw this here. This is my top 10 best movie soundtracks. A couple rules for how I laid this out, and obviously these are my personal choices. I haven't listened to every soundtrack ever, but let me lay this out. The first is, when I say soundtrack, what I actually mean is score. It's film scores that I'm talking about. So these are not collections of songs. This is not like the Pulp Fiction soundtrack. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the film scores written by a composer specifically for a film. The other thing is, I made a rule for myself that no composer can be on this list more than one time, because otherwise this basically would be a list of only 3 composers and just a whole bunch of movies that they worked on. So that did mean I had to make some very hard decisions with some of these folks. But with those having been established, let's get to it. First, I'm actually going to do an honorable mention for one that I wanted to include but could not decide how to credit it. And that is the soundtrack to Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. Now, it's officially credited to Klaus Badelt. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. The thing is, though, is that he is a sort of a pupil to Hans Zimmer, and the more I looked into it, the more it looked like Hans Zimmer kind of ghost wrote a lot of that soundtrack, and then Hans Zimmer took over for the sequels. And since I've got Hans Zimmer on this list for something else, but it also didn't write to credit it to him, like that, I kind of had to disqualify this one. But I love this soundtrack and I wanted to mention it anyway. So secret number 11, I guess. Okay, list proper. Number 10. Jerry Goldsmith with the soundtrack to the original Planet of the Apes. Jerry Goldsmith was a composer I knew was going to be on here, and he has had an amazing body of work, but the very dissonant and sort of abstract but highly evocative soundtrack to the original Planet of the Apes, it's an amazing piece of work. It is intense, and it you know, like there'll be little bits and stings, like a couple boom, like of a drum, like out of nowhere, and there's always a tension and a weirdness to it, and yet it at the same time feels organic to how weird the situation is. It feels like the perfect soundtrack for this strange situation. It's a strange score, but man, I love it. So, number 9, we now do get to my actual Hans Zimmer entry, The Lion King. Now, this does not include the songs, because those were other folks working on that. No, this is just the score. And I know a lot of people think about Lion King music and they think about Circle of Life, Can't Wait to Be King, Can You Feel the Love Tonight, and all that. But the music and the scores and the things linking between the actual musical numbers, across the Pride Lands, there's a sense of wonder and majesty, like especially towards the end. In the climax and sort of the triumph of it with Simba at the end, it really is a really enveloping piece of music. It takes you to that place so well. And like, Hans Zimmer has done a lot of great music, and this was one of those ones that was tough to call, but ultimately when I saw a list of everything done, I'm like, I gotta give it to that one. So moving along to number 8, I have to have somewhere on here a soundtrack from a Miyazaki film. So that does mean I am at Joe Hisaishi. I hope I pronounced that at least vaguely right. And he's done, I think, every soundtrack for Miyazaki. If not every soundtrack, almost every soundtrack. For me, though, the one that I will always come back to is Princess Mononoke. Because it has the smaller, quieter, more whimsical, sort of lighter fairy touch that is present in a lot of his soundtracks that he does for Miyazaki for obvious reasons, but it also has that extra touch of epic scope that the grander story of Princess Mononoke demands. And the main theme in that is a wonderful sweeping piece of music, and again, it just makes you feel like you're standing looking out over a forest. It is, it's beautiful. So next up, another anime soundtrack for number 7. This one from Kenji Kawai, and it is The Ghost in the Shell, the original anime film soundtrack. And most Ghost in the Shell products, at least that I have seen, because I didn't see the live action remake by choice, have had really good music. And Standalone Complex has had great music, but that score for the original Ghost in the Shell, and the hauntingness of it, especially during the opening credits, the Making of a Cyborg soundtrack, and it has this sense of ominousness and yet also a weird kind of sense of hope. It's like celebrating and mourning all at once. And it has one of my favorite single tracks of movie music ever, which is The Floating Museum, which is used during the climax with the Major and that tank. I love that piece. And it's a great soundtrack besides. So from here, we're going to go up one. Number 6, Daft Punk, Tron Legacy. There have been a couple, only a couple of movies in my life that one of my first thoughts when the movie was over was, I need that music. I need it now. And this was absolutely one of them. The film itself is okay. It's visually pretty cool. The story has neat ideas that it doesn't go deep enough on, and it's fine. But the way that I enjoy this movie is basically by treating it as a 2-hour Daft Punk music video, because the music is great. I have a really weird sort of relationship with techno and electronic music, which is that I am capable of liking it, even loving it, but I don't like sort of the standard generic electronic techno kind of music. If you were to find what most people would consider to be standard techno, I'm going to get bored with this really quick. But there is that feeling of an orchestral build, even as there's all this electronic music, but it has, the heavy horns, but it always has that thumping electronic beat. Oh man! And it gives you, again, that sense of another world, and it's so good. I wish the movie was as good as this soundtrack. That would have been amazing. Number 5, time for me to talk about Danny Elfman. And Danny Elfman's soundtracks haven't grabbed me in a long time, but I will never, ever tire and never stop going back to the soundtrack to Batman from 1989. That, to me, is Batman music. I think Batman, that is the music that plays in my head. And I loved Hans Zimmer's work on Nolan's film, especially in The Dark Knight. But it's still this. The sense of darkness, of forebodingness, but also this sort of undercurrent of heroism. It doesn't feel like oppressive darkness. It does feel like there's a light in this dark. And it's so perfect. It's perfect not only for Tim Burton's version of Batman, it's perfect for Batman. And it got solidified with how that feel got adapted for the Batman animated series. Different composer for that, but it was obviously very much taken in that vein and in that style. And that, to me, just is Batman music, and it's haunting, and it's beautiful and it's intense at the right moments and it's silly at times with the Joker tracks. Oh, man. Why are these all so good? Number 4, another more recent film and one whose soundtrack I have talked about in other videos before. John Powell with How to Train Your Dragon. He also did How to Train Your Dragon 2, which is very good, but there's something about the first time with this. And there are few soundtracks that I can think that I would describe as soaring. This soundtrack soars. And it is one of the most gloriously triumphant pieces of music. I mean, it's a wonderfully triumphant movie, series even. It's one of the things I love about it. And to have that so perfectly encapsulated in the music, especially in the track, I think it's Come Back Around Again, or maybe it's just Come Back Around, which is used for the very end of the film. Just the way it sort of, it builds and then it lulls, and it feels like flight. It sort of lulls and that's gliding, and then it soars. It takes off, and I get choked up just hearing it. Like, it gives me that much of an emotional rush. And not because it makes me think of like a sad part of a movie, because it makes me think of the awesomeness and the glorious victory and triumph of something. And I think partially because it's not necessarily a sense of triumph over somebody else. It's a sense of triumph in just dealing with life and obstacles and differences. And yes, there's still like a villain in this film, but the movie's not about triumphing over the villain. And so the music doesn't feel like we're having a sense of triumph because we beat somebody. Like, no, we're having a sense of triumph because we overcame. Oh, it's a great soundtrack. Number 3, we get a pretty unique one here, and which is why it's on here. Not only that it's on here, but it's as high as it is. Vangelis, Blade Runner. Nothing before Blade Runner sounded like Blade Runner. There have been a handful of things after Blade Runner that sounded like Blade Runner, but it's because they're trying to sound like Blade Runner. The Blade Runner soundtrack is this mix of electronic ambiance with jazz, with blues, with this sense of longing, this very noir feeling vibe of we're just trying to get by in this world. And it's a feel I love from the film, and the soundtrack is a big part of the reason why that feeling is there. And it can have darker moments, but for me it's ultimately things like Rachel's song and the Blade Runner love theme that really just hammer home how well this film connects with me. And it nails the loneliness and the melancholy of these characters. It embodies it in the music itself. And like I said, it just doesn't sound like anything else. Oh boy, it's really good. Only a couple left now. Next we get to the one that is the composer. Everybody knew he was going to be on here. The soundtrack I picked, probably not the one most would have put on here for him though. But we'll see. So John Williams, there was gonna be John Williams on here because, I mean, how could you not? But like, what John Williams? I mean, the guy practically wrote the soundtrack to my geekdom. He did Jaws and Star Wars and like not just like the original, like all the Star Wars movies and most of Spielberg's movies. He did E.T., he did Superman. Like, oh my God, how do I pick one? Well, ultimately the one that I landed on as being what I think is the best exemplar of what he does and just how good he is. It's the soundtrack to Raiders of the Lost Ark. So why this one? And that's kind of the thing, like, I wouldn't have to justify putting John Williams on here. I do kind of have to explain why I went with this one. And I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's got a great overture and a great theme, which is the man's specialty. But it's also got, I think, the best non-highlighted tracks as well. Because oftentimes I'll find myself with the Williams score skipping to the big numbers. And sometimes skipping over, the smaller moments because the music doesn't draw me in as much. I don't do that with this one. I listen to the whole thing, start to finish. I never skip a track. And the sense of awe and mystery with the music that is used, to build up the sense of just the unknown around the arc itself is great. Indy's music is obviously astounding, but there's actually the track that solidified this for me and why I had to pick this one. It's an odd one. The track is called The Desert Chase, and it's a specific moment. So the Desert Chase it's the whole scene where Indy goes after the truck. He starts out on a horse. He climbs along the truck, throws out the driver. The whole bunch of Nazis in the back. They're coming out. They're crawling around. He's got to shake them off, like run up against trees and bump into other cars and all this other stuff. So that's the track that's going on. The moment that made me go, oh, this is why it's got to be number one. There's a point at which there's only one Nazi left in the back of the truck that Indy is driving. And this is a character we've never seen before, got no history on, no clue who this dude is. He's just another Nazi. And instead of climbing along the side, he climbs up over the top to get to the cab, to get to Indy. And the music that plays while he's crawling across does all of the work to make you afraid for Indy. Because at this point, he's been shaking off Nazis left and right. Like, we shouldn't be afraid of one more Nazi. Like, okay, maybe we know Indy's a little tired, but like he's taking all these other ones out. But the music builds the tension. The music tells you this dude right now is a big problem. And I honestly put that all down to the music in that moment. It sells what otherwise doesn't quite play. And that is the magic of what John Williams can do at his best. And I do think Raiders of the Lost Ark is him at his best. But did not take my number one spot. Now, what is at number one is a composer who I actually think, in the breadth and scope of his career, is an inferior composer to most of the other composers on this list. But this one soundtrack is my all-time favorite movie soundtrack. The composer is James Horner. The soundtrack is Braveheart. James Horner is a composer that I can get very frustrated with. He could do good work, but he also self-plagiarized a lot. He reused the same like 3 or 4 note brass sting, ominous little brass sting in more movies than I can count. Off the top of my head, I first noticed it in Willow, and since then I've noticed it in Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, The Perfect Storm, the Mask of Zorro, Avatar. Like it keeps turning up, and if you know enough of his work, you can pick out more things that he just keeps reusing again and again and again, none of which are evident in Braveheart. And the blending of the bagpipes with a more traditional orchestral score creates something unique, something really beautiful, something that to this day I just can't get enough of. And I think in much the same way that, Daft Punk took a type of music that I can be iffy on, but managed to use that and convey it in a way that really connects with me. It's the same thing here with the bagpipes, because I don't have an inherent love of bagpipes. I mean, they're fine. I don't find them unattractive as instruments, but I'm not yeah, bagpipes. But their use here and the mournfulness of them here. But also at times the sort of the unifying themes used through them, or the Irish whistles for the princess's theme. I will always be bowled over by this soundtrack, and I will never get tired of listening to it. And if I'm ever down, if I'm having a lousy day, this is one of those things that I can put on, and it may not automatically make my day better, but it will soothe my soul. And that's why, for me, it's my favorite soundtrack of any film. So that is my list. I have to imagine that other people's lists wildly different. So, favorite movie soundtrack or film score, or however you want to classify it, what is it for you? Whatever it is, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff you can do, because there's buttons and links, including one to my Patreon, if you feel like supporting me that way. If you don't worry. Other links you can check out. Don't want to click on them? That's fine too. Because at the end of the day, folks, you're the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.